You have probably heard the frequently repeated arguments that homosexuality is a genetic trait and that homosexuals are born with different brains than heterosexual people. These arguments are often used in an attempt to silence those who have legitimate criticisms of homosexuality. However, the gay brain and gay gene studies that people refer to when attempting to defend the legitimacy of homosexuality did not actually prove anything at all. The myth that homosexuals are born with their orientation first exploded into public consciousness in 1991, when researcher Simon LeVay studied the brains of 35 cadavers presumed to be of homosexual men. LeVay is himself a gay man and an outspoken gay activist, although the media did not question his social-political allegiances and the possibility that these could pose a conflict of interest. LeVay examined a tiny cluster of neurons called the hypothalamus in the men's brains. He could not say whether the small differences he found there were a result of homosexual behavior or the cause of it. Neither could he know whether those differences were caused by brain damage from the gay men's active HIV infections. His small study was never repeated by another researcher, but it fortified gay activists' claims that homosexuals are a people born different. Because the LeVay study fulfilled the media's desire for news that supports gay activism, it made headlines around the world. However, since that time, LeVay has quietly admitted that he has not proven that homosexuals are born that way. LeVay himself admitted the following: "It's important to stress what I didn't find. I did not prove that homosexuality is genetic, or find a genetic cause for being gay. I didn't show that gay men are born that way, the most common mistake people make in interpreting my work, nor did I locate a gay center in the brain." 10 years after his study was first reported, LeVay admitted to a gay magazine that research such as his has, in fact, been politicized, which means, of course, that it was exaggerated, misused, and distorted for a political purpose. But from the perspective of gay activism, this has, nevertheless, served a useful goal. LeVay himself admitted the following: "The question of whether or not gayness is immutable is rather crucial in the political arena." Again, the homosexual man who conducted the homosexual brain study that people frequently cite to claim that homosexuals are born that way has himself admitted that his study did not prove, in any way, shape, or form, that homosexuals are born that way. Soon after the LeVay study in 1993, another homosexual man and homosexual activist named Dean Hamer released a study that claimed to have found a gene that appeared to be the foundation for male homosexuality. The press announced his study as further evidence that homosexuals are born that way. However, when two other researchers tried to reproduce Hamer's results in an even larger and more extensive study of their own, their findings were quite different. The researchers said the following: "Our results are so discrepant from Hamer's original study. Because our study was larger than that of Hamer's, we certainly had adequate power to detect a genetic effect as large as was reported in that study. Our findings do not support the presence of a gene that causes homosexual orientation." Later, when asked if homosexuality was rooted in biology, Hamer did admit, absolutely not. But the media headlines of Hamer's study conveyed a quite different message to the public than Hamer's own words. They conveyed, incorrectly, the message that homosexuality is inborn. The scientists whose research supposedly proved the born that way theory now agree it is a myth. They admit that it is environmental, that is, parental, social, and experiential influences that beckon the individual through that door to be confirmed as homosexual. This conclusion has been well known in the scientific community for a few decades, but has not reached the general public. Unfortunately, people continue to claim that a homosexual gene exists, even though the homosexual man who conducted the homosexual gene study admits that a homosexual gene does not exist. The public has also been bombarded with politicized coverage of the widely publicized gay twin studies, which claimed to provide further evidence of a genetic basis for homosexuality. The studies of identical twins actually showed the powerful shaping influence of environment, because if genes make someone homosexual, one would expect to find every pair of identical twins to be either uniformly homosexual or uniformly heterosexual. This is, of course, not the case. As Dr. Whitehead, the author of the book My Genes Made Me Do It, explains, Identical twins have identical genes. If homosexuality was a biological condition produced by the genes, such as eye color, then if one identical twin was homosexual, in 100% of the cases his brother would be too. But if one twin is homosexual, the other usually is not. Furthermore, the subjects used in that twin study were not a random sample, but were self-selected volunteers who had responded to an advertisement. Members of the homosexual community are well aware of the political importance of trying to prove that homosexuality is inborn, and thus twin pairs in which both brothers were homosexual would be those pairs most likely to volunteer. These same twin studies also highlight the different ways brothers and sisters perceive the same set of parents. This would support the common observation that many families with several children will produce only one homosexual child, while the child's other brothers and sisters grow up heterosexual. The researchers' team asked identical twins, one was homosexual, one not, about their early family environment, and found that the same family environment was perceived by the twins in quite different ways. These differences led later to homosexuality in one twin, but not in the other. Identical twin studies, in which one identical twin is homosexual and the other identical twin is heterosexual, prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that homosexuality is not genetic. Mental illness and homosexuality often develop in one identical twin but not the other, because each twin has different experiences and different perceptions of experiences in childhood. And when it comes to identical twins, the homosexual twin is nearly 7 times more likely to attempt suicide than the heterosexual twin, which again shows the concrete connection between mental illness and LGBT orientation. No one is born homosexual. Dr. Elaine Siegel was a pro-homosexuality psychoanalyst who never intended, desired, or even tried to heal her patients of lesbianism. However, when she helped her patients to process and heal their childhood traumas, their lesbianism often spontaneously healed and turned into heterosexuality. As Dr. Siegel explains in her book on lesbianism, some assert that homosexuality needs to be normalized, a view I myself held for years until the patients described in this book taught me otherwise. Dr. Elaine Siegel accidentally made over 50% of her lesbian clients become fully heterosexual by helping them to heal the gender identity trauma that they experienced as little girls. By the way, lesbians becoming heterosexual is such a common occurrence that the LGBT community has even invented a slang word for it. If lesbians can become heterosexual just by becoming tired of other lesbians, then they can definitely become heterosexual if they get therapy for the childhood gender trauma that led to their homosexuality in the first place. The same goes for homosexual men. Also, it is not uncommon for lesbian women to have sex with homosexual or bisexual men, anything but a straight man. And this is why lesbians have high rates of sexually transmitted diseases, despite the fact that their sexual practices are not hazardous to the health of the body like those of homosexual men. Also, although homosexual males are dramatically more promiscuous than lesbians, lesbians are more than twice as likely as heterosexual women to have had sex with more than 50 men during their lifetime. The fact that the average lesbian has sex with more males than the average heterosexual woman makes it pretty clear that homosexual behavior is not genetically determined. And only 7% of women who have sex with women report never having had sexual contact with a male. Dr. Joseph Nicolosi was a clinical psychologist and LGBT expert who helped many of his LGBT clients to become heterosexual. It is very important to note that just like Dr. Siegel, Dr. Nicolosi did not set out to fix homosexuality in any of his patients. Dr. Nicolosi was not a conversion therapist. He was a trauma therapist. His work focused on helping his patients to repair the damage caused by their childhood traumas. And as fate would have it, many homosexuals ended up becoming his patients. When working with them, he consistently observed that as his patients dealt with, processed, and healed their childhood gender traumas, that their homosexual desires naturally and spontaneously diminished and eventually disappeared as a direct side effect of healing their psyches. This first-hand experience is how Dr. Nicolosi became an expert in understanding the root gender traumas that cause people to identify as LGBT. The fact that homosexuals can and do become fully heterosexual proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that homosexuality is not genetic. It is impossible to change your race or gender because these are both genetically determined. Homosexuality can be recovered from because it is a psychological disorder. Also, keep in mind that legitimate trauma therapy is completely different from conversion therapy. Conversion therapy isn't actually therapy and doesn't work because it doesn't heal the root cause of homosexual urges, which is gender trauma. If you don't get to the root, you can't heal homosexuality.
The focus of reintegrative therapy is trauma processing, and as a byproduct, sexuality may change spontaneously. But sexuality change is not the goal. The resolution of traumatic memories is. If client and therapist enter with this understanding, it frees both of them up to take a more exploratory, mindful approach. Numerous published studies show that sexuality can change, sometimes dramatically. Among women reporting any amount of same-sex attraction, fully half of them experienced a sexual attraction shift toward heterosexuality. There are other major studies that have reached similar conclusions, including findings by the American Psychological Association. What might be most interesting is that the client and therapist are not trying to change the client's sexuality. The change occurs as a spontaneous byproduct of the process.
As I have discussed in other videos, homosexuality, like transgenderism, is a gender identity disorder that stems from gender trauma and a dissociation from binary gendered objective reality. Both children and adults have successfully healed from gender identity disorders, even in cases where the gender identity disorder was so extreme that researchers assumed the cause had to be genetic. Individuals have still responded very well to therapeutic intervention. Again, if something can be healed with psychological therapy, it means it is not an inborn genetic trait. For example, in one study of children with gender identity disorders, the researchers stated the following about a boy with severe gender identity disorder. When we first saw him, the extent of his feminine identification was so profound. His mannerisms, gestures, fantasies, flirtations, etc., as shown in his swishing around the home and the clinic, fully dressed as a woman with a long dress, wig, nail polish, high screechy voice, slatternly, seductive eyes that it suggested irreversible neurological and biochemical determinants. After 26 months follow-up, he looked and acted like any other boy. People who viewed the videotaped recordings of him before and after treatment talk of him as two different boys.